All right, so today what we're going to start with is the culture survey. If you are at home, go ahead and click on the culture survey until you get to the link and just go in and take that survey, please. Once you're done with that, we're going to go right here to Sub-Saharan Africa quick check number 5, the last quick check. So go ahead and pull that up, and as we go along, I'm going to give you the answers to it. All right, government and economics, agriculture and food supply. All right, it asks you what are some of the problems, facing the public health of sub-Saharan Africa today. One of the main problems that they face is famine. Okay, famines have occurred in Sudan, Ethiopia, Niger, and Somalia. And when you think about famine, uh, one of the main things you see here when you talk about famine in these countries, remember, food production has not grown as fast as the population. An estimated 214 million people in Africa are at least undernourished or facing serious health conditions because of malnourishment. European colonization affected the food availability because most of the fertile land was used to grow cash crops for export. Okay, so what is a cash crop? A cash crop is a crop that is developed primarily for the simple, making of money. A cash crop is something that you can't really eat, like tobacco, cotton, sugarcane. Sugarcane doesn't feed a lot of people. What it does is provide stuff for alcohol and, of course, sugar. Sugar is, if you're ever in trouble and you're starving, like let's say there's a zombie apocalypse, take a cup of water, dump some sugar in it. It's called glucose. It'll keep you alive for a long time. But in general, sugar is a cash crop. It has no real nutritional value other than, calories, I guess you could say. Um, Food crops that are grown in Africa include corn that was brought from the Americas, yams, which are basically like sweet potatoes, sorghum, and some kind of beans or legumes. Some other problems that you have facing the public health: national governments and international agencies are committed to improving healthcare in Africa by reducing disease. So one of the problems they have would be disease. Okay, so you've got famine, now you're going to put disease. The average life expectancy for a person living in sub-Saharan Africa was 52 years. That's almost 30 years shorter than that in North America. Why? Well, if you look at the numbers, you have 801,000 people dying from malaria. Malaria kills thousands each year. Numerous organizations such as the World Health Organization and Malaria No More are working to eliminate the disease. Where does malaria come from? Malaria has killed actually one of the most famous people the world has ever known, Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great conquered many, many lands from what you would consider Greece all the way to India. But what got him? A mosquito. Malaria comes from a mosquito bite. If you're in tropical areas, your body and you're not really used to that sort of thing, but malaria is one of the biggest killers in Africa. And to be honest with you, politics play a part of this. There used to be a drug called DDT. You've probably never heard of it, but back when I was younger, it was a real popular sort of thing because what they used to drop DDT on was crops. And people started going, hey, this is bad for you. They shouldn't be dropping this on the crops. Well, it kills mosquitoes. Okay. For years, we dropped it on Africa. Okay. We would take planes, drop it on them. People started going, well, that's dangerous. No science behind it whatsoever. In fact, little kids used to bathe in DDT and nothing ever happened to them. But because someone thought it was bad, they banned DDT. And now that's one of the reasons you see the problems that they have there with malaria. If you look on any map, tropical areas have more malaria than, I guess what you would say, where it's sunny, the warm, lots of mosquitoes. You do have more chance of getting it in places like Africa, Southeast Asia. 97 countries worldwide reporting malaria cases in 2015. And then estimated number of people who die every day is around 2,400, which is a pretty big number. It's funny because, and I hate to be that guy, but typically malaria kills more people than COVID-19. I mean, if you look worldwide, of course not, because you find COVID-19 here, okay, where you don't find malaria here, right? You don't hear about people in America getting the malaria. So if you look per capita, this is going to kill more people because you have a 99%, survival rate from COVID-19 in every country, whereas malaria, probably not. If you get malaria, odds are you're going to get a very bad, fever. Of course, you could treat it better, but the fever is what kills people. Alexander the Great died of a fever. All right, and then finally, war. So if you look up here at the top, this is the answer to number 1. War, famine, and disease. In Sudan, nomadic Muslim herders of Arabic descent live in the north, while farmers of African descent who practice Christianity live in the south. Christians have been oppressed by the government since the 1950s. Millions of Sudanese have fled the country as refugees. The Lost Boys of Sudan, a group orphaned during the Civil War, stuck together to escape the violence, traveled to Ethiopia and Kenya seeking safety. And then more than 3,500 of these people came to live in the United States. One thing that will happen in a lot of there's a great movie, it's called Tears of the Sun. It's probably not appropriate for young kids, it's rated R, but it kind of shows you how the warlords treat Christians and people like that. There was a girl on some sort of mission, a humanitarian mission, and they realized the country was about to be overthrown, so they sent in a group of Delta Force guys to go and get the girl, and she's like, well, I'm not leaving without them, the Lost Boys. And so they were kind of like, what are we going to do? He goes, well, we'll take them with us, but if they become a liability, we're going to leave them behind. So he disobeyed orders, and then there's this great scene where they come upon this village, and these, soldiers are doing really bad things to the women. They're torturing the men and young boys. They're taking the boys and forcing them into military service. And so the guy in charge, who is played by Bruce Willis, kind of looks over and goes, you don't have to go with me, but I'm going down there. And then they go down and they get a little retribution on those people doing all those bad things. But it's one point in the movie, it's kind of sad because this is something that is a reality, especially for Christians that live in areas controlled by Muslim warlords or warlords in general. So you do see this a lot. War is only good for death. I mean, there's nothing good that comes from it. There's nothing good about it. When you think about the innocent people that are there, that are sort of caught in the crossfire, they have nowhere to go. They're extremely poor. It's really a sad sort of state of affairs.
Sudan Civil War in which more than 2 million people died. The boys' parents were killed. Their sisters also sold into slavery. Many of the boys died too, but the survivors, thousands of them, started walking across East Africa alone. 5 years later, they walked into a refugee camp in Kenya. That's where we first met them, when many were hoping to go to the United States. Well, 3,000 did, as part of the largest resettlement of its kind in American history. We followed the boys for more than a decade and couldn't resist revisiting them, see how they're doing. But first, we'll take you back to northern Kenya, to the Kakuma refugee camp, springtime 2001. The story will continue in a moment. Nothing drew a crowd like the list. Once a week, the Lost Boys saw their destiny on a bulletin board, the staples of life. On this day, 90 learned they'd be going to America. Wisdom. I'm going to founding of college. Every Sunday, a plane arrives at the camp to take the boys from nowhere to somewhere. From Kakuma to JFK and beyond. Not all of the Lost Boys got to go. Joseph Taban Rufino had walked to the board so many times he tried not to get excited. What's new?
Something new. Yeah, I've seen my name before.
Your name's on the board, huh?
Yeah.
Where are you going?
Kansas City.
Kansas City.
Yeah.
Do you know where it is?
I don't know.
Abraham Yelmiel was taking this walk for the 25th time. He was an ordained minister of Sudan's Episcopal Church at Kakuma. He looked at the board as if it were a holy scroll.
I went to Chicago. Is it interesting?
Oh, it's very interesting. It's very interesting.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
They were called the Lost Boys because they were between 5 and 11 when their Christian villages in southern Sudan were attacked by Islamist forces from the north. When they saw their villages burning, they started running. Streams of boys became rivers. Hundreds became thousands until an exodus of biblical proportions was underway. They walked for 3 months across Sudan barefoot. 12,000 found refuge in Ethiopia. But after 4 years, they were chased out at gunpoint, chased to the Gilo River, where the waters did not part. For Joseph Taban, that day will never go away.
We saw so many people who were just floating in the river.
Dead bodies.
Dead bodies, yeah. So floating in the river.
Many were shot, many drowned, many were eaten by crocodiles. Zachariah Magat was there.
1,000 to 2,000 that died in that river.
1,000 or 2,000 died in that river.
Yes.
It wasn't much better on the other side. They walked across deserts, over mountains. They had no food or water. Paul Dang was 7 when he started the walk.
You have to urinate so that you drink your own urine.
Did you ever do it yourself?
Yeah, I didn't want to die. Other people didn't want to die.
In the spring of 1992, after walking more than 1,000 miles, the boys made it over the border into Kenya to a desolate place called Kakuma. For the UN, it was an emergency of vast proportions, these emaciated children. The boys, it was the safest they'd been in 5 years. Joseph became a medical assistant at the camp clinic. Abraham found a job preaching the gospel in a church full of mud. The Lost Boys couldn't go home to Sudan, and Kenya didn't want them. Then, in the year 2000, the State Department decided they deserved a break and invited them to come live in the United States.
What we want to do is give you a correct understanding of what life will be like in America.
Before they took off for their new lives in the new world, Sasha Chanoff, a teacher from Boston, gave them a crash course, America 101.
Does anybody know who the president of the U.S. is now?
George Floyd W.
Things they could not imagine. like winter.
This is a little what winter in America feels like. What does it feel like?
Will you die because of that coolness?
No, people do not die because of the coolness.
He had 3 days to prepare them for a leap of 1,000 years.
Many of them have never been exposed to lights or to a fork and a knife or seeing a TV. It's a group that's lost in time.
They had 4 days to pack their luggage. They took little, left less behind.
Abraham, yan.
Abraham was taking the book he'd been carrying for 10 years.
You still have the Bible that you carried from Ethiopia here.
It's my life. I've been called a lost boy, but I'm not lost from God. I'm lost from my father.
As in any farewell, the lost boys were saying, "See you soon." But they knew better. Yakubu was losing its doctor and its priest. The boys had never been on a plane before. They'd never even been on a bus. 5 planes in 2 days. First initiation rite, airplane food. And then changing planes in Brussels, getting their feet on the ground in the Western world. Next stop for Joseph Taban and his brothers, Kansas City.
Oh, yeah.
And you know that this place is so different.
Abraham the preacher man was supposed to go to Chicago, but at the last minute, it was changed to Atlanta. Volunteers introduced them to their new apartments. American mysteries, like a sink or a stove.
Don't touch because it burns.
It's hot.
A vacuum cleaner. Or a can, let alone a can opener.
Wonderful machine.
Within a few weeks, Joseph had his first job in a sweltering fabric factory. When he got home from work at 11 at night, he stayed up studying for that medical career he'd always dreamed of. You wouldn't be surprised to learn that Abraham found his salvation in church. All Saints, one of the largest Episcopal churches in Atlanta. A month after his arrival, he was invited to be a guest deacon.
Hallelujah, hallelujah.
Praise be to God. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
You were terrific, Abraham. You were so good.
The big problem was the sheer size of America and everything in it. Home Depot was a long way from home.
It's turned too big.
Oh, I know it is.
It's confusing.
Confusing? Try to imagine what a fountain looks like to a man who's walked 1,000 miles through a desert. Sasha Chano, who taught the boys back in Kenya, said it was not easy for them to distinguish between what was real and what was pure fantasy in America.
They're hearing that people have gone to the moon. If you're telling me people have gone to the moon, then they're seeing on TV that a horse can talk. Why is a horse talking so different from someone going to the moon? It's hard for people to distinguish what is reality and what is not. Some boys saw a street sign that said dead end, and they thought, oh, if I go down there, am I going to die?
Then came 9/11, just a few months after the boys got here. They thought they had left that kind of thing far behind forever.
And it seems that the war is following us. Wherever we go, war came after us.
Yes, Dave.
As it did once again. The boys weren't surprised by it, not the way Americans were. For them, Islam and terrorism went together, always had. Their reaction was immediate. Help the victims. In Atlanta, they offered to donate blood to the survivors in New York. they were turned away.
So what we did, we just collect some money, $2, $5, because we have nothing. And we give about $400. $400. Yeah. That's amazing.
It really is.
Yes. A community with nothing. People just came from Africa.
But they weren't coming anymore. After 9/11, the flight scheduled to bring over more lost boys were stopped. And the boys already here were having a tough time of it. That dreaded American winter was now upon them. They'd been warned, but it still came as a shock. Winter gave them fun times as well, though. Escapades. What Americans call a learning experience. And Christmas, their first. In America, we call him Santa Claus.
Okay, Santa Claus. I do have Santa Claus.
He lives up in the North Pole with me. He rides on reindeer.
Okay. You mean he lives in North Pole? Yeah. Is he from, how do I call these people?
Eskimos.
Eskimos, yeah?
Well, he's the guy who brings presents to all the children on Christmas.
Okay. Yeah.
He makes kids happy, that's the important thing.
That's good, that's good.
Okay, pull back.
Within the year, the Kansas City investment banker Joey McClaney took Joseph under his wing and put him in the saddle.
Oh, always that way.
McClaney offered up his brand new car for Joseph's first driving lesson.
Stop, stop, break.
Okay.
Break. Okay, don't break away. Take the break.
Candy.
That's the break, the big one.
I'm so sorry what I made. Yeah. I'm sorry, I made the music. Yeah.
That was nearly 12 years ago. In a moment, we'll give you a picture of the road the Lost Boys have been taking in America.
All right, Somalia. And it asks you, number 2 says, why is Somalia considered a failed state? It's all of these reasons that you see here. Somalia has never united into a single nation because of rival clans. In 1991, clan-based groups overthrew the government, and so you still have, battles between clans. So there's no real formal government in Somalia, even though they try to do this. It's just very difficult. Farming was disrupted. Plus you had famine, you had drought. So there's a very limited food supply. We watched that video on, piracy, which explained why people, turn to piracy. You have $104 average annual salary for most people there. Most people there basically make around 22 cents a day. That's like something in the 1920s. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So, all these reasons is what you would see as Somalia being a failed state. You can see on here, this is the answer to number 2. This is a modern day pirate ship. I mean, it doesn't look any kind of modern when you look at it. But British soldiers who took over the vessel found guns, grenades, rocket launchers. Remember, on the black market, they have investors, so they give them about 30 grand to, supply this ship with all this stuff so that they can, in some way overtake other ships. All right, some more about governments and economics, ending apartheid. Apartheid is a real confusing thing to a lot of people. The 1800s, Dutch and British colonists laid claim to lands in South Africa, meaning a lot of people from these areas were moving to South Africa to sort of colonize the area. Lands were seized from various African tribes, and some were enslaved. 1902, Britain took over all of the lands and divided South Africa into white areas and black areas, much like you found here in the United States up until the 1960s, a form of segregation. All right. In America, the segregation was simply, if you went to a restaurant, there was a white section and a black section. For years, when I would go to, there was a place when I was, maybe a little bit younger than you or older than you, there was a place called Woolworths, and Woolworths has always been a sign of, some sort of segregation in general, and because of the picture of the Woolworth counter during the Civil Rights Movement. But when you went in the back, I did not live through segregation, by the way. I'm not that old. But when you go to the back, there's 2 men's bathrooms, and then there's 2 women's bathrooms. And I'm like, well, what kind of idiot, made these bathrooms? But they were made during the segregation era, where you had an African-American bathroom and you had a white bathroom. Okay. The same thing really occurred in South Africa. The big difference is you're talking about the indigenous people who lived there originally, who are segregated from whites, who moved there and, for whatever reason, colonized South Africa. The new laws created this form of segregation, apartheid, which is the legal separation of races. Number 3, there's your answer, the legal separation of races. And then number 4 asks you, who was imprisoned after protesting the treatment of Black Africans? It was Nelson Mandela. He became the symbol for the protest movement in South Africa. Eventually, once he was freed, Nelson Mandela was elected to be the president of South Africa after voting rights were extended to all South Africans and apartheid ended. Apartheid was a really ugly time in our history, and even, it lasted much longer than, for example, the 60s, mid-60s. It's when we ended segregation in this country, but this lasted up into the 80s. And as you can see, 1994, once Nelson Mandela was freed, a bad part of history, Europeans, being who they are, not the nicest people in the world. Cultural geography, a variety of cultural traditions exist as a result of the diverse ethnic groups found throughout sub-Saharan Africa. Cultural characteristics, uneven population distribution, many ethnic groups, languages, and customs blend together or, separate people. One of the things that you learned from looking at that video of the Lost Boys, you have a large number of refugees as a result of political, ethnic, and environmental crises. So political meaning war, environmental meaning like famine. A lot of people will leave areas that have a great deal of famine and move away. Music has always been a way for Africans to celebrate their culture. African music is linked to the development of jazz, blues, rock and roll, gospel in the United States. The last question asks you, West African music was influenced by the story and the music of the griots. The griots are traditional storytellers who have passed on the histories of West African cultures through oral tradition. So that is the answer to number 5. Traditional storytellers who passed on the histories of West African cultures through oral tradition, meaning spoken tradition.
Thank you so much. My name is Sigo Bangura from West Africa, country called Guinea. I was born in a music family back home. So, which is music family back home, we call it griot. Griot, the people who born inside music, and they carry through the same culture from the great-grandparent to the grandparent to the mom to the dad. So, like me, I was born in music family, so I was griot. So in Africa, if you are griot, you can be playing instrument or storyteller. It's not only the griot all of them play music. Some of them they don't play music, but some of them they're storyteller, and some of them play music. So some of the griot without music, their life is a little bit missing. Okay, so like me, my life is music. So if I can do music, something is missing in my life. Okay, that's how I grew. And back home as well, if you're not born in a music family in West Africa, your parents they won't let you play music because you're not grew family. But now things change, everybody can do whatever they want to do. So this one's called Kora. So I'm gonna take a little bit of drum and play that one for you as well.
All right, music and dance. Music is an integral part of African culture. Many instruments used to create music in Africa are percussion, like you saw him playing the drums there. Dance is used in conjunction with music. African dance varies from place to place. Drumming is a form of communication and used to create music for many different occurrences and events. All right, let's move on from that music video. Number 4 was Nelson Mandela. You want me to go back? Let me go back to make sure you get the right answer. Right there he is, Nelson Mandela.
When did he retire?
He passed away. I'm not real sure when that was, but
So he was the president?
he was the president. Yep. After, now remember, he was in prison for like 10 years. Then once he was released, and he was always the symbol, kind of like a martyr, you know, he was in prison, and people knew that it was wrong for him to be in prison. Hey, y'all got that? Did I go over that? Yep. Masks, African tribal masks were used in religious and spiritual ceremonies or social events. Sculpture, art, most African sculpture was made of wood. The sculpture was a very important aspect of tribal cultures. Dress, colorful traditional dress. Tribes used their dress as an identifier. Clothing was hand-dyed and stitched to create vibrant colors and designs. Jewelry, since ancient times, jewelry has been a sign of wealth and status among people of Africa. It is often colorful and fashioned from beads, seashells, etc. There's also some stuff that they do as far as neck binding and things like that, where they make the neck really long and thin by restricting it, sort of a weird thing. Here you see pictures of markets in Africa, and you could see all of the type of stuff that they have in these markets: clothing, food, etc. Churches, a lot of the churches are really, really old, especially when you consider, you know, Europeans that came to this country or this continent brought Christianity with them. So some of the buildings are pretty old. Here you see some mosques, and this is in Timbuktu, if I'm not mistaken, over here on the left, and minarets that came from the Islamic religion. One of the videos of the video of the Lost Boy, I don't think people here can quite understand poverty until you've seen it in the villages. This is probably not the worst living conditions that you will find. Looks like a mud hut, you know, something you see in the on Gilligan's Island. You know, I mean, you know, modern people don't live like this here, but there, this isn't really bad digs. Till you've experienced this, you know, in person, it's kind of hard to, I guess, understand it. They do have a growing increase of schools. Historically speaking, African countries, African nations, Africans in general, a lot of people go, why are African countries so overpopulated? Well, they had a high infant mortality rate, meaning if you had a child, the odds are, if you had 2, 1 probably wasn't going to make it. If you had 3, increases your chance. So the more kids you have, the more chance that they actually what? Survive. Unheard of here. But there, a lot of kids were, you know, born out of necessity, meaning they needed kids to work on things like farms to provide income. So a lot of kids in Africa historically have not been educated. You guys don't care about your education that much in some cases, but I mean, imagine living in a world where you didn't go to school. I mean, it's not, you know, it's not a good place to be, a bunch of kids who are uneducated. But here in the more recent times, you do find more and more schools in Africa and more parents who are willing to send their children to school. All right, modern city centers. Contrary to popular belief, sub-Saharan Africa is home to many cities. These cities are really comparable to any of the other ones, you know, Other major cities worldwide, they contain shopping, tourist destinations, shipping centers, other characteristics of major cities such as large population and developed infrastructure. So let's say that you live on the outskirts of a city. You might want to relocate to that city to find work. You know, probably more opportunities for people in the cities. Kenya is modernizing its economy and improving its standard of living. Kenya is proof that multicultural societies can work together towards a common goal. Education is an important factor in the modernization of Kenya. The adult literacy rate increased from 32% in 1970, which is extremely a low number. That means, you know, 3 out of 10 people could read or write, to 85%, where 8 out of 10 people could read or write in 2003. Kenya's national parks and reserves attract tourists. You see this wildlife preserve here with the lions and everything, and that really does spark its tourism industry. We're not going to do the poem.